Colonel Jamal Washington stands frozen at the boarding gate, the flag-draped transfer case visible through the window on the tarmac. Airline attendant Bryce Miller smugly refusing boarding, military ID or not, you need a first-class ticket. The fallen soldier's family watches in disbelief. Washington's phone rings, Pentagon calling. Before we dive deeper into this shocking story, where are you watching from today? Hit that like button and subscribe if you believe our military deserves better. The disrespect shown to this decorated officer and fallen hero is just the beginning of a story that will make your blood boil. The morning had started like any other for Colonel Jamal Washington at Fort Bragg, North Carolina. With 23 years of distinguished service, including 3 combat tours in Afghanistan and 1 in Iraq, Washington was no stranger to difficult assignments. His chest full of medals told the story of a man who had given everything to his country, rising through the ranks despite the obstacles that often faced African American officers in the military. "Colonel Washington, you've been assigned escort duty," said General Phillips, sliding a folder across his desk. "Sergeant Andre Taylor. Kia last week during a reconnaissance mission. His remains are being flown to Dover today." Washington's heart sank as he opened the folder. He knew the name immediately. Taylor had served under his command 5 years ago, a bright, promising young soldier with an infectious smile and natural leadership abilities. "I know the family, sir," Washington said quietly. "That's partly why you were chosen," Phillips replied. "The Pentagon feels it would provide some comfort to the family. Taylor spoke highly of you in his letters home." For Washington, this assignment was both an honor and a burden. Military escort duty was one of the most solemn responsibilities an officer could be assigned, accompanying a fallen comrade on their final journey home, ensuring they were treated with dignity and respect every step of the way. As Washington drove home to pack and inform his wife Keisha about the assignment, memories of young Taylor flooded back. He remembered the day Taylor had approached him after a particularly grueling training exercise, asking for advice on applying to officer candidate school. "You've got what it takes, Taylor," Washington had told him. "Don't let anyone tell you different." Washington had written a glowing recommendation, but Taylor had ultimately decided to remain an NCO, preferring to stay with his unit and the men he led. It was that dedication that made him an exceptional sergeant, and had likely contributed to his sacrifice in the field. At home, Keisha recognized the look on her husband's face immediately. After 2 decades as a military spouse, she knew what escort duty meant. "Who?" she asked simply. "Andre Taylor. Remember him? Came to our barbecue a few years back. Wanted to meet Miles because he was thinking about West Point." Keisha's hand went to her mouth. "Oh, Jamal. His poor parents." Washington nodded, thinking of Darnell and Patricia Taylor. Good people who had already sacrificed years of their son's presence for their country. Now they had given everything. "I need to call them," he said, reaching for his phone. The conversation with the Taylors was as difficult as he'd expected. Patricia's quiet sobs in the background as Darnell tried to maintain composure. Washington explained the process, how he would meet them at Dover Air Force Base for the dignified transfer ceremony, then accompany them and their son's remains to their hometown of Atlanta. "Thank you, Colonel," Darnell said, his voice breaking. "Andre always spoke highly of you. Said you were one of the few officers who saw him for what he could do, not what he looked like." The words hit Washington hard. Throughout his career, he'd faced his share of discrimination, even in uniform. The sidelong glances when he entered officers' clubs. The assumption he must be a quartermaster or in some support role rather than combat arms. The extra scrutiny of his decisions compared to his white counterparts. He'd navigated it all with quiet dignity, determined to excel not just for himself but for those who would come after him. As Washington meticulously pressed his dress blues and polished his shoes to a mirror shine, he thought about what this duty meant. For the military, escort duty was sacred, a final act of brotherhood. The escort officer served as the physical embodiment of the nation's respect, ensuring that at no point was the fallen service member left alone. It was a promise to the family and to the fallen, "We will bring you home with honor." Little did Washington know that this sacred duty would soon place him at the center of a national controversy, one that would expose the uncomfortable reality that even in death, dignity was sometimes determined by the color of one's skin. The somber atmosphere at Dover Air Force Base weighed heavily as Colonel Washington stood at attention on the tarmac. The massive C-17 transport plane had just landed, carrying Sergeant Taylor's remains along with 2 other fallen soldiers from different operations. Washington watched as the ground crew prepared for the dignified transfer, the military's term for the solemn movement of remains from the aircraft to the waiting vehicle. Across the tarmac, Washington spotted Darnell and Patricia Taylor. Patricia leaned heavily on her husband's arm, her face revealing the sleepless nights since receiving the devastating news. Washington approached them with measured steps. "Mr. and Mrs. Taylor," he said softly, extending his hand to Darnell first, then Patricia. "I wish we were meeting again under different circumstances." Patricia looked up at him, recognition flickering through her grief. "Colonel Washington. Andre always said you believed in him when others didn't." Washington nodded, emotion threatening to break through his professional demeanor. "Your son was an exceptional soldier and an even better man. It's my honor to escort him home." A military chaplain approached, informing them that the transfer was about to begin. Together, they walked to the designated viewing area as an honor guard assembled near the aircraft's cargo ramp. The ceremony proceeded with precision and reverence. The honor guard, clad in their service dress uniforms, marched to the aircraft. The hydraulic whine of the cargo door opening seemed unnaturally loud in the silence. Then, with slow, deliberate movements, the flag-draped transfer case containing Sergeant Taylor's remains was carried down the ramp. Washington stood at attention, rendering a salute that he held until the transfer case was secured in the waiting vehicle. Beside him, Darnell Taylor also saluted his son one last time, tears streaming down his weathered face. After the ceremony, Washington accompanied the Taylors to the Mortuary Affairs Center, where they completed necessary paperwork and discussed the next steps. Their commercial flight to Atlanta was scheduled for the following morning, giving the mortuary staff time to prepare Sergeant Taylor's remains for the final journey home. "The airline has been notified that we're transporting a fallen service member," Washington explained. "They've arranged for a special boarding process, and they understand I'll need to accompany the casket during loading and unloading." That evening, Washington joined the Taylors for dinner at their hotel. The conversation eventually turned to memories of Andre, bringing brief smiles amid the grief. "Remember when he was 7, Darnell said, and decided he was going to be a soldier for Halloween? Made his own uniform out of his scout clothes and my old work boots." Patricia nodded, reaching for her phone to show Washington photos of Andre, from childhood through his military service. "He sent us this one last month," she said, displaying a picture of Andre with his squad, all smiles in front of their barracks. "He led by example," Washington said. "His men respected him because he never asked them to do anything he wouldn't do himself." Washington shared his own stories of Andre's service under his command, his determination during training exercises, his concern for the welfare of his troops, the time he had volunteered to stay behind during a holiday to allow a fellow soldier with a new baby to go home. As the evening wore on, Washington couldn't help but reflect on his own family, his wife Keisha and their 2 children, Miles and Zoe. Military service demanded sacrifices not just from those who wore the uniform but from their families as well. The Taylors had made the ultimate sacrifice, one that Washington prayed his own family would never have to make. The next morning, Washington arrived at the hotel in his dress blues, medals aligned perfectly on his chest. He escorted the Taylors to the airport, where they were met by a mortuary affairs officer who confirmed that Sergeant Taylor's remains had been transferred to the airline's care. At the check-in counter, the airline representative expressed condolences to the Taylor family and assured them that special arrangements had been made. "We'll be boarding you first, along with Colonel Washington," she explained. "And we've notified the flight crew about the nature of your journey." As they moved through security, Washington noticed the respectful nods from TSA agents who recognized his uniform and understood the purpose of his travel. Several fellow travelers stepped aside to allow the group to proceed, a few murmuring, "Thank you for your service," or offering quiet condolences to the Taylors. The journey through the terminal continued without incident, with occasional glances of respect or curiosity from civilians who recognized the significance of a full-dress uniform. An elderly veteran in a Korean War cap stood and saluted as they passed, which Washington returned with equal respect. "Your son is coming home with honor," Washington assured the Taylors as they approached the gate area. "Everything has been arranged." What Colonel Washington couldn't know was that the carefully planned dignity of this solemn journey was about to be shattered at Gate C-24, where Gate Agent Bryce Miller was beginning his shift with a chip on his shoulder and a blind spot that would soon expose a troubling reality about how America sometimes treats its heroes. The atmosphere shifted noticeably as Colonel Washington and the Taylor family approached Gate C-24. The busy terminal seemed to quiet around them, the significance of Washington's formal dress uniform and the grief-stricken parents drawing respectful glances from other travelers. Washington approached the counter with quiet confidence, having escorted fallen soldiers before. He knew the protocol by heart: airline staff would be notified in advance, special boarding would be arranged, and he would supervise the loading of the transfer case personally. Behind the counter stood Bryce Miller, a thin man with a permanent scowl who barely looked up from his computer as they approached. Beside him, his supervisor Karen Fletcher tapped rapidly on another terminal, her expression equally disinterested. "Good morning," Washington said, placing his military ID and paperwork on the counter. "Colonel Jamal Washington, escorting the remains of Sergeant Andre Taylor. We should be in your system for priority boarding." Miller glanced at the documents without picking them up, then at Washington's uniform, his gaze lingering on the colonel's face rather than the impressive array of medals on his chest. "You're not on the priority list," Miller said flatly. Washington maintained his composure. "There must be a mistake. The arrangements were confirmed yesterday. I'm escorting a fallen soldier, and his parents are traveling with us." He nodded toward the Taylors, who stood nearby. Miller's eyes flicked to the Taylors, then back to Washington with an unmistakable hardening of his expression. "These papers don't mean anything here. You need a first-class ticket for priority boarding." The dismissive tone wasn't subtle. Washington had encountered it before, the particular edge some people took when addressing him despite his rank, as if the oak leaves on his shoulders were somehow less significant than they would be on fairer skin. "There seems to be a misunderstanding," Washington said evenly. "Military escorts for fallen service members are standard protocol for your airline. I need to supervise the loading of Sergeant Taylor's remains and ensure he's treated with proper dignity throughout the journey." Miller slid the documents back across the counter without looking at them. "That's not my problem. You'll board with your assigned group." By now, several nearby passengers had taken notice of the exchange. An older man with a Marine's cap stepped closer, frowning at the gate agent's tone. "Excuse me," Washington said, his voice remaining measured but firm. "I need to speak with your supervisor." "I am the supervisor," Karen Fletcher interjected, stepping forward. She was a middle-aged woman with streaked blonde hair pulled into a tight ponytail. "And Mr. Miller is correct. Our boarding policy is clear." Washington took a deep breath. "Ma'am, I'm not asking for a courtesy upgrade. I'm performing a military duty, escorting a fallen soldier home to his family. That requires me to observe the transfer of his remains onto the aircraft." Fletcher's expression remained impassive. "Our policy supersedes your military orders, Colonel. You'll need to board with your assigned group." From behind Washington, Patricia Taylor let out a small sound of distress. Darnell placed his arm around her shoulders, his jaw tight with controlled anger. "Is there a problem here?" A woman in her 30s with curly red hair stepped forward from the growing crowd of onlookers. She had her phone in her hand, angled subtly toward the confrontation. "No problem, ma'am," Fletcher said quickly. "Just explaining our boarding policies." It looks like you're refusing boarding to a military officer escorting a fallen soldier, the woman, Tricia Hayes, said loudly enough for nearby passengers to hear. Is that what's happening? Fletcher's eyes darted to Hayes' phone, now clearly recording the interaction. This is an airline matter, ma'am. Please step back. Washington turned to Hayes. I appreciate your concern, but I'm trying to resolve this professionally. He turned back to the counter, pulling out his phone. I'm going to contact my commanding officer to clarify the situation. You can make calls somewhere else, Miller snapped. We're preparing to board the flight. As Washington stepped aside to make his call, he could see through the large windows to the tarmac, where Sergeant Taylor's flag-draped transfer case was being prepared for loading. The sight strengthened his resolve. General Phillips, this is Washington, he said into the phone. There's an issue with the airline. They're refusing to acknowledge the escort protocol. He listened for a moment. Yes, sir. I'll hold. While waiting, Washington noticed more passengers gathering, many looking increasingly concerned. The veteran in the Marine's cap had engaged another military-looking man in conversation, both glancing repeatedly at Washington and the gate agents. Fletcher announced the beginning of boarding for passengers needing special assistance, studiously ignoring Washington and the Taylor family. As passengers began to line up, many cast sympathetic glances toward Washington. I can wait to board, an elderly woman announced loudly as she was called forward. Not until they show proper respect to our military. Miller's face flushed. Ma'am, please board now or step aside. Washington returned to the counter after finishing his call. My commanding officer has confirmed the protocol. He's contacting your corporate office now. That won't change anything here, Miller said, a hint of smugness creeping into his voice. Some people think they're special, but the rules apply to everyone. The racial undertone wasn't lost on Washington or the growing number of observers. Tricia Hayes, still recording, stepped closer again. I'm streaming this live, she said quietly to Washington. Just so you know. Before Washington could respond, 2 airport police officers approached, summoned by Fletcher. Her triumphant expression quickly faded, however, as the officers recognized the situation immediately. Colonel, the lead officer said, rendering a respectful nod. What seems to be the issue? As Washington explained, the officer's expression darkened. He turned to Fletcher. Ma'am, military escorts for fallen service members are standard protocol. There's no reason to deny the colonel appropriate access. Our airline policy, Fletcher began. Your airline policy includes military escort protocols, the officer interrupted. I've supervised dozens of these transfers myself. Through the windows, the ground crew had paused near Sergeant Taylor's transfer case, awaiting resolution of the boarding issue. The dignity of a fallen soldier, a black soldier, hung in the balance, his final journey home stalled by what increasingly appeared to be nothing more than prejudice disguised as policy enforcement. On the concourse television, Washington could see a breaking news churn scrolling across the bottom of the screen, developing, Airline denies military officer escorting fallen soldier. Tricia Hayes' video was already spreading across social media, faster than anyone could have anticipated. The boarding area around Gate C-24 had transformed from a typical pre-flight gathering to something resembling a standoff. On one side stood Colonel Washington and the Taylor family, joined now by several supportive passengers including Tricia Hayes with her still-recording phone and Samuel Bennett, the Vietnam veteran in the Marine's cap who had refused to board. On the other side, gate agents Bryce Miller and Karen Fletcher maintained their position behind the counter, continuing to call boarding groups despite the growing tension. First class and priority passengers may now board, Miller announced, deliberately avoiding eye contact with Washington. Several first-class passengers approached the gate, then hesitated, looking uncomfortably between their boarding passes and the unfolding situation. I'll wait, said a businessman in a tailored suit, stepping out of line. The colonel should board first. Fletcher's face tightened. Sir, if you don't board now, we can't guarantee your seat. Are you threatening to bump paying customers who support our military? Hayes called out, her phone capturing every word. Comment number 1: if you think this airline should be ashamed of treating a fallen soldier and his escort this way. The businessman joined the growing cluster of passengers standing in solidarity with Washington. I've got diamond status with this airline, he said loudly. But I've never seen such disrespect. My father was a Vietnam vet who didn't get the welcome home he deserved. I won't be part of denying another soldier his dignity. Through the large terminal windows, the flag-draped transfer case remained visible on the tarmac, a silent rebuke to the unnecessary delay. Every minute that passed was another minute Sergeant Taylor's remain sat in the elements rather than being treated with the dignity he deserved. This is unacceptable, Darnell Taylor said, his voice breaking the tense silence. Until now, he had maintained remarkable composure, but watching his sons remain sitting on the tarmac while bureaucracy and prejudice blocked their journey home had pushed him to his limit. My son died for this country. He deserves better than this. Patricia Taylor wiped tears from her eyes as several nearby passengers murmured in agreement. Like or subscribe if you believe our fallen heroes deserve respect regardless of their race, Hayes continued, her livestream comments section exploding with activity. Should Colonel Washington be allowed to escort his fallen soldier with dignity? Should airline staff who disrespect our military be held accountable? The confrontation had grown beyond just one boarding gate. Passengers from neighboring gates had begun to gather, drawn by the commotion and the growing crowd of news crews that had responded to tips about Hayes' viral video. Samuel Bennett, the Vietnam veteran, approached Washington. Colonel, I served in '68. When we came home, they spat on us. I won't stand by and watch another soldier disrespected, especially not one who made the ultimate sacrifice. Washington nodded his thanks, maintaining his professional bearing despite the churning emotions beneath the surface. He had faced discrimination before, but never when performing such a sacred duty. Each minute that passed was another minute the Taylor family had to endure this public humiliation on what was already the worst day of their lives. A younger man in a National Guard uniform pushed through the crowd, approaching Washington and rendering a salute. Sir, Staff Sergeant Luis Rodriguez. I'm on leave, but I served with Andre in training. Let me help. Washington returned the salute. Thank you, Sergeant. Rodriguez turned to the gate agents. This is outrageous. Do you have any idea what escort duty means? It's not a perk or a privilege, it's a solemn responsibility to ensure a fallen comrade is never left alone. Miller's expression darkened. Don't tell me how to do my job. Everyone thinks they're special, but rules are rules. Special? Rodriguez echoed incredulously. A soldier died serving this country. His parents are standing right here, watching their son's body sit on the tarmac because you won't follow your own airline's protocols. The tension in the terminal continued to build. An airline customer service representative arrived, looking flustered as she took in the scene. The news cameras, the growing crowd, the viral video being streamed live to thousands. Comment number 1: if you think these airline employees should be disciplined for this treatment, Hayes prompted her viewers. Would this be happening if Colonel Washington were white? Do we treat all our military heroes this way, or just some of them? Share this video if you believe discrimination has no place in how we honor our fallen soldiers. The delay had now pushed back the flight's departure time, and the pilot had emerged from the jetway to assess the situation. Upon seeing Washington's uniform and understanding the circumstances, his face registered shock and dismay. Colonel, he said, approaching Washington. I was informed we had a fallen hero on this flight, but not about any boarding issues. This is completely unacceptable. The pilot turned to Fletcher and Miller. This escort has priority. That's airline policy, FAA policy, and basic human decency. Fletcher flushed. We were following procedures. No, the pilot cut her off. You weren't. I'll be reporting this. A voice came over the terminal speakers, attention in the terminal, Flight 2381 to Atlanta is delayed due to passenger boarding issues. We apologize for the inconvenience. The announcement sparked immediate reaction from the gathered crowd. Passenger issues, a woman shouted. They're blaming the victims. Rodriguez turned to the crowd. That soldier on the tarmac gave his life. Now they won't even give him the dignity of a proper escort home. The airline's regional manager had arrived, hurrying through the terminal with a look of barely concealed panic. The situation had escalated beyond a gate dispute, it had become a national incident unfolding in real time, with thousands watching online and more in the terminal itself. Through it all, Washington maintained his composure, standing at parade rest, his eyes frequently moving to the window where Sergeant Taylor's transfer case remained visible, a constant reminder of what this confrontation was truly about. Not airline policies or boarding procedures, but the final journey of a young man who had given everything for his country, and the parents who deserved to see their son treated with honor and dignity to the very end. What would happen next? Would the airline finally do the right thing, or would this escalate further? Would justice be served for Colonel Washington, the Taylor family, and most importantly, for Sergeant Andre Taylor? The situation at Gate C-24 had reached a critical point. What had begun as a dispute over boarding procedures had transformed into something much larger, a public reckoning about respect, dignity, and the uncomfortable reality that even in death, not all American heroes were treated equally. Colonel Washington stood firm, his military bearing unbroken despite the mounting tension. Beside him, the Taylors remained stoic in their grief, though Patricia occasionally dabbed at her eyes with a handkerchief. Around them, a protective circle of supporters had formed, fellow veterans, concerned citizens, and passengers unwilling to board while this injustice continued. Group B may now begin boarding, Miller announced mechanically, as if the growing crisis around him wasn't happening. Not a single passenger moved toward the gate. If you don't board now, you may lose your seat, Fletcher added, her voice tight with strain. From the back of the crowd, a woman called out, "I'll give up my seat. This is more important." Others quickly echoed the sentiment, creating an impromptu boycott of the flight. The solidarity was a powerful statement, dozens of travelers willing to disrupt their own plans to stand with Washington and the Taylors. Tricia Hayes continued her live stream, which had now attracted hundreds of thousands of viewers across multiple platforms. "We're witnessing something extraordinary here," she narrated. Complete strangers coming together to demand respect for a fallen soldier and his family. The airline's regional manager, David Pearson, tried to take control of the situation. "Ladies and gentlemen, we apologize for the confusion. If everyone would please proceed with boarding, we can sort this out." "There's nothing to sort out," Samuel Bennett, the Vietnam veteran, responded loudly. "The colonel boards first and supervises the loading of the fallen soldier. That's protocol." "It's not just protocol," added Rodriguez, the National Guardsman. "It's about respect." Washington's phone rang, a call from the Pentagon. He stepped aside to answer, his expression grave. "Yes, General," he said. "The situation remains unresolved." "Yes, sir." "Understood." When he returned, Washington addressed Pearson directly. "The Secretary of the Army is now aware of this situation. He's personally contacting your CEO." Pearson blanched visibly, finally grasping the magnitude of the public relations disaster unfolding before him. But before he could respond, Fletcher interjected. "We can't change policy for one person," she insisted. "Everyone needs to follow the same rules." The comment sparked immediate backlash from the crowd. "One person?" Bennett echoed incredulously. "That one person is a soldier who died for this country." Washington's mind flashed back to other moments in his military career, the time a restaurant host had tried to seat him and his family in the kitchen despite empty tables in the dining room. The security guard who had followed him through the exchange while ignoring white officers, the countless times he'd been asked if he was lost when entering officers' areas. Each incident he had handled with the same quiet dignity, never wanting to confirm the stereotype of the angry black man that could undermine everything he'd worked for. But this wasn't about him. This was about Andre Taylor, a young man who had given his life for his country and deserved to be brought home with honor. This was about the Taylors, parents who had made the ultimate sacrifice and were now being forced to watch as their sons' remains sat on a tarmac due to the stubborn prejudice of two airline employees. Outside, the setting sun cast long shadows across the tarmac, highlighting the flag draped over Sergeant Taylor's transfer case. Ground crew members stood nearby, awaiting resolution, unwilling to move the fallen soldier without his escort present. Inside the terminal, news cameras had multiplied. Local stations had given way to national networks, all broadcasting the standoff live. Social media was ablaze with outrage, the hashtags #RespectTheFallen and #ColonelWashington trending nationwide. This isn't just about today, Washington said, speaking directly to Pearson while cameras captured every word. This is about whether we mean what we say when we claim to honor those who serve. Sergeant Taylor gave everything for this country. His family has given everything. All I'm asking is to fulfill my duty to bring him home with dignity. The raw emotion in Washington's typically measured voice silenced the terminal. Even Miller and Fletcher seemed momentarily chastened. Pearson looked desperately between Washington, the news cameras, and his increasingly insubordinate gate agents. "I need to make some calls," he said finally, retreating from the counter. As he stepped away, Patricia Taylor approached Washington, placing a hand on his arm. "Colonel," she said softly, "Andre would be proud of how you're standing up for him. He always said you were a man of principle." The simple statement, delivered through a mother's grief, struck Washington deeply. He thought of his own children, how he had taught them to stand tall in the face of injustice, to know their worth even when others questioned it. He thought of the countless black service members who had served with distinction only to face discrimination in the country they defended. "Mrs. Taylor," he replied, "it's my honor to bring your son home. And I promise you, we will not leave this airport without ensuring he receives the respect he deserves." As if on cue, a new figure emerged from the terminal crowd, a distinguished older man in an expensive suit, moving with purpose toward gate C-24. Lawrence Davis, the airline's executive vice president of operations, had arrived personally, having been contacted directly by both Pentagon officials and the airline's panic-stricken CEO. The crowd parted as Davis approached, his face grave as he took in the scene, the news cameras, the united passengers, the stubborn gate agents, and at the center of it all, a decorated colonel standing firm beside grieving parents. Sometimes, Washington reflected, it took a spotlight to illuminate what should have been visible all along, that dignity wasn't a privilege to be granted or withheld based on the color of one's skin, but a right that every American, especially those who had given their lives in service, deserved without question. The standoff had reached its tipping point. The next few minutes would determine whether justice would prevail, or whether Sergeant Andre Taylor's final journey would remain stalled by the very prejudice he had died fighting against. As Executive Vice President Lawrence Davis strode toward Gate C-24, the ripple effects of what had begun as a boarding dispute were spreading far beyond the airport terminal. Tricia Hayes' livestream had swelled to over 2 million viewers across multiple platforms, while major news networks had interrupted regular programming to cover the unfolding situation. Breaking news out of Philadelphia International Airport, announced a CNN anchor, where a black colonel escorting a fallen soldier is reportedly being denied proper boarding by airline staff. "We're going live to the scene." Online, the public response had erupted with volcanic force. Veterans groups had mobilized with remarkable speed, flooding the airline's social media accounts with demands for accountability. Military family organizations issued statements of support for Colonel Washington and the Taylor family. Civil rights leaders called the incident a shameful display of the discrimination that persists even for those in uniform. On Hayes' live stream, comments poured in by the thousands. "My son is deployed right now. This breaks my heart. I'm a 20-year veteran. This would never happen to a white officer. Cancel my membership. I'll never fly this airline again." The airline's social media team had hastily posted a generic statement that only fueled the outrage. "We are aware of a situation regarding military boarding procedures at PHL. We have the utmost respect for our service members and are investigating the matter. We apologize for any inconvenience." The response was immediate and brutal. Inconvenience? A soldier died for this country. Investigating what? It's on video. This isn't a situation, it's discrimination against a black colonel and a fallen black soldier. Back at the gate, Davis approached Colonel Washington with an outstretched hand. "Colonel, I'm Lawrence Davis, Executive VP. First, let me offer my sincerest apologies for this inexcusable situation." Washington accepted the handshake with military precision. "Mr. Davis, this isn't about me. This is about Sergeant Taylor and his family." Davis nodded, turning to the Taylors. "Mr. and Mrs. Taylor, I cannot begin to express how sorry I am that you're experiencing this during such a painful time. Please know that what has happened here does not reflect our company's values or policies." Darnell Taylor's response was measured but firm. "Our son gave his life for this country. All we ask is that he be treated with the dignity he deserves." Davis nodded solemnly. "You have my word that we will make this right." He turned to address the gathered crowd and cameras. "Ladies and gentlemen, what has occurred here today represents a serious failure on our part. Colonel Washington should have been granted immediate boarding to perform his solemn duty, and the Taylor family should have been treated with the utmost respect and care." He continued, looking directly at the cameras. "Effective immediately, I am personally overseeing the proper boarding protocol for Colonel Washington and the Taylor family. Furthermore, Mr. Miller and Ms. Fletcher are being removed from their duties pending a full investigation." The announcement drew applause from the gathered passengers, but Davis raised a hand. "This is not a moment for celebration. This is a moment for reflection on how we, as a company and as Americans, treat those who have made the ultimate sacrifice for our country." As Davis spoke, Miller and Fletcher were quietly escorted away from the gate by airline security, their faces ashen as they realized the magnitude of the situation they had created. In Washington, D.C., Pentagon officials held an emergency press briefing. "The Department of Defense is deeply concerned by reports of disrespect shown to a fallen service member and his escort," stated the Pentagon press secretary. "We are in direct communication with airline executives to ensure this situation is resolved and that appropriate changes are made to prevent such incidents in the future." Veterans Affairs Secretary James Robertson issued his own statement, "Every fallen hero deserves to be brought home with dignity and honor, regardless of race. What we're witnessing is a painful reminder that we must remain vigilant against discrimination in all its forms." On military bases across the country and around the world, service members watched the coverage with particular intensity. For many black service members, the scene was painfully familiar, a reflection of the dual battles many fought, both against foreign enemies and against prejudice at home. At Fort Bragg, General Phillips had gathered his staff to monitor the situation. "This is why our diversity initiatives matter," he told them gravely. "Because even in 2023, one of our best officers, escorting a fallen hero, can be disrespected because of the color of his skin." Social media continued to amplify the story. Hayes' video had been shared by celebrities, politicians, and military figures alike. The hashtags had evolved, #Justice for SGT Taylor and #Stand with Colonel Washington now dominated trending lists. Competing narratives had begun to emerge as well. Some conservative commentators questioned whether race was really a factor, suggesting Washington might have been difficult or failed to follow proper procedures. These takes were quickly drowned out by the overwhelming evidence captured on video and the testimony of dozens of witnesses. The airline's stock price had begun to drop as investors anticipated the fallout. Corporate sponsors were publicly reconsidering their partnerships. Other airlines took the opportunity to reaffirm their own military escort policies, some announcing enhanced training programs for staff. Through it all, Colonel Washington maintained his composure, standing at parade rest near the window where he could keep Sergeant Taylor's transfer case in view. His military training had prepared him for many things: combat zones, diplomatic crises, life-or-death decisions under pressure. But nothing had prepared him for becoming the reluctant center of a national conversation about race, respect, and what America truly owed its fallen heroes. Hayes approached him during a quiet moment. "Colonel, I hope I didn't overstep by recording. I just couldn't believe what I was seeing." Washington shook his head. "Without your video, this might have been dismissed as a misunderstanding. You made sure the truth couldn't be ignored." As new gate agents hurriedly prepared for boarding, Washington's phone buzzed with a text from his wife Keisha. "We're seeing everything on the news. So proud of you for standing firm. Bringing Andre home with dignity is what matters. Love you." In that moment, Washington was reminded of why this stand was necessary, not just for Andre Taylor, but for every service member who deserved to be seen for their sacrifice rather than judged by the color of their skin. The public response had forced a reckoning that private dignity never could have achieved. Sometimes, he reflected, justice required not just standing firm, but being seen standing firm, so that others might recognize injustice that had been hiding in plain sight all along. The atmosphere at Gate C-24 shifted palpably with the arrival of Executive Vice President Lawrence Davis. Unlike the defensive posturing of lower-level managers, Davis brought with him an air of genuine remorse and determination to make things right. His presence signaled that this situation had escalated to the highest levels of corporate concern. "Ladies and gentlemen," Davis addressed the gathered crowd, news cameras, and live stream audiences, "I want to personally assure everyone that what has occurred here today represents a failure that we take extremely seriously. Colonel Washington and the Taylor family will be boarding immediately, and I will personally ensure that Sergeant Taylor receives the dignified treatment he deserves." Davis turned to the new gate agents who had replaced Miller and Fletcher. "Please prepare for immediate boarding for Colonel Washington and the Taylor family." The lead gate agent nodded respectfully. "Yes, sir. We're ready whenever the Colonel is." For the first time since arriving at the gate hours earlier, Washington felt the tension in his shoulders begin to ease. Not for himself, he had endured far worse in his military career, but for the Taylors and for Sergeant Andre Taylor, whose final journey had been unnecessarily delayed by prejudice masquerading as policy. "Colonel," Davis said quietly, "if you'd like to go down to the tarmac now to supervise the loading, we've arranged escort." Washington nodded. "Thank you. Mr. and Mrs. Taylor will board first." Of course, Davis agreed immediately. As Washington prepared to head to the tarmac, a spontaneous reaction began among the passengers. It started with Samuel Bennett, the Vietnam veteran, who stood at attention and saluted. One by one, other veterans in the crowd followed suit. Then civilians began to stand as well, many placing their hands over their hearts in a show of respect not just for Washington, but for the fallen soldier he was escorting home. The silent tribute spread through the terminal as Washington, accompanied by an airline representative, made his way toward the stairwell that would take him to the tarmac. Travelers stopped their hurried journeys, airport staff paused their duties, and for a brief moment, the usual chaos of the busy airport yielded to a collective acknowledgement of sacrifice. On the tarmac, Washington approached Sergeant Taylor's transfer case with measured steps. The ground crew stood at a respectful distance, waiting for his instructions. Washington rendered a precise salute to the flag-draped case, holding it for a long moment before turning to the crew. "Sergeant Taylor is ready for boarding," he said simply. With Washington supervising, the ground crew proceeded with careful, dignified movements. There would be no rushing, no casual handling. This was a sacred duty, and Washington's presence ensured it would be performed with the honor Sergeant Taylor deserved. Inside the terminal, Davis personally escorted Darnell and Patricia Taylor to the jetway entrance. "Mr. and Mrs. Taylor, on behalf of the entire airline, I want to express our deepest condolences for your loss and our sincere apologies for the disrespect shown earlier. Sergeant Taylor's sacrifice will not be forgotten." Patricia Taylor, who had maintained remarkable composure throughout the ordeal, finally allowed her tears to fall freely. "Thank you for making this right," she said softly. "Our son loved this country. He deserved better than what happened today. Yes, ma'am, he certainly did, Davis agreed solemnly. As the Taylors boarded, the new gate agent announced, "Ladies and gentlemen, we will now begin boarding our flight to Atlanta. As a reminder, we are honored to be transporting a fallen American hero today. We ask for your continued respect and patience during this special flight." The boarding process resumed with a new solemnity. Passengers who had stood in solidarity with Washington and the Taylors now filed onto the plane quietly, many stopping to offer personal condolences to the family as they passed their seats. When Washington returned from the tarmac and boarded the aircraft, something unexpected happened. As he walked down the aisle toward his seat, passengers began to applaud. The spontaneous ovation spread throughout the cabin, a rare moment of unity among strangers brought together by circumstances none had anticipated. The flight's captain emerged from the cockpit, approaching Washington with an outstretched hand. "Colonel, on behalf of our entire crew, it's our honor to transport Sergeant Taylor today. I want to personally apologize for what you and the Taylor family experienced. It doesn't reflect who we are or what we stand for." Washington accepted the handshake. "Thank you, Captain." Taking the cabin microphone, the captain addressed the passengers. "Ladies and gentlemen, today we have the solemn privilege of bringing home Army Sergeant Andre Taylor, who made the ultimate sacrifice in service to our nation. Sergeant Taylor is being escorted by Colonel Jamal Washington. Please join me in a moment of silence to honor Sergeant Taylor's sacrifice." The cabin fell completely silent, no rustling papers, no clicking seatbelts, no whispered conversations. For those brief moments, everyone on board was united in recognition of a young life given in service to country. As the aircraft pushed back from the gate, Washington glanced out the window at the carefully loaded transfer case in the cargo hold. He had kept his promise to the Taylors and to Sergeant Taylor himself. Despite the obstacles, despite the disrespect, despite the all-too-familiar sting of prejudice, Andre Taylor would complete his journey home with the dignity and honor he deserved. Beside him, Tricia Hayes spoke quietly. "Colonel, thank you for standing your ground. You've taught a lot of people an important lesson today." Washington shook his head slightly. "I didn't do it to teach a lesson. I did it because it was right." "That's exactly why it's so powerful," Hayes replied. As the plane gathered speed and lifted into the evening sky, Washington reflected on the day's events. What had begun as a routine escort duty had become something much larger, a moment that forced people to confront uncomfortable truths about how America sometimes treated its heroes, and about the persistence of prejudice even in the face of ultimate sacrifice. The turning point hadn't come with Davis's arrival or the removal of Miller and Fletcher. It had come in the countless small acts of solidarity, from Bennett's refusal to board, to Hayes's decision to record, to the spontaneous standing tribute in the terminal. It had come when ordinary people, confronted with injustice, had chosen not to look away but to stand together against it. That, Washington thought, was perhaps the most fitting tribute to Sergeant Andre Taylor, a reminder that the ideals he died defending were still worth fighting for, even on American soil. The aircraft touched down in Atlanta under a clear evening sky, the setting sun casting long shadows across the tarmac. For the passengers of Flight 2381, the journey had been unlike any other, a shared experience that had transformed a plane full of strangers into something resembling a community, united by their witness to both injustice and its remedy. As the plane taxied to its gate, Captain Reynolds made a final announcement: "Ladies and gentlemen, we ask that you remain seated upon arrival to allow Colonel Washington and the Taylor family to deplane first. Additionally, a military honor guard is waiting on the tarmac to receive Sergeant Taylor." Through the windows, passengers could see the honor guard assembled on the tarmac. 8 soldiers in dress uniform standing at attention near the cargo hold. Their presence was a visible reminder of the purpose of this flight and the precious cargo it carried. When the aircraft came to a complete stop, a respectful silence fell over the cabin. Colonel Washington stood, nodding gratefully to Darnell and Patricia Taylor as they gathered their belongings. Together, they moved toward the front of the aircraft, where the flight attendants stood with solemn expressions. "Thank you for your service, Colonel," the lead flight attendant said quietly. "And Mr. and Mrs. Taylor, our deepest condolences for your loss." As they deplaned, Washington was struck by the contrast between their arrival and the confrontation in Philadelphia. Here, there was no question about protocol, no dismissive treatment, only respect and acknowledgement of sacrifice. On the tarmac, the honor guard stood at perfect attention. Their commander, a captain from Fort Benning, saluted Washington, who returned the gesture with equal precision. "Colonel Washington, we're ready to receive Sergeant Taylor," the captain said. Washington nodded. "Thank you, Captain. His parents are here as well." The captain turned to the Taylors, offering a respectful nod. "Mr. and Mrs. Taylor, on behalf of the United States Army, please accept our deepest condolences. We're honored to receive your son and will ensure he is treated with the utmost dignity and respect." As ground crew opened the cargo hold, Washington took his position overseeing the transfer. The honor guard moved with disciplined precision, their movements a choreographed testament to respect. When Sergeant Taylor's flag-draped transfer case emerged, they received it with careful hands, never rushing, every motion deliberate and dignified. Patricia Taylor watched with tears streaming down her face, Darnell's arm firm around her shoulders. This was how it should have been from the beginning, their son's sacrifice acknowledged, his return home marked by ceremony and respect rather than bureaucratic obstruction. Nearby, news crews captured the solemn transfer. The story that had begun with Tricia Hayes' viral video had expanded into national coverage, with every major network reporting on both the initial confrontation and its resolution. Commentators had spent hours discussing not just the incident itself, but the broader issues it highlighted about race, respect, and how America treated its military personnel. As the honor guard placed Sergeant Taylor's transfer case in the waiting hearse, Washington stood at attention, rendering a final salute to the fallen soldier he had sworn to bring home with dignity. The image, a black colonel in full dress uniform, silhouetted against the setting sun, honoring a black soldier who had given everything for his country, would appear on front pages across the nation the following morning. Miles away in Philadelphia, the repercussions of the day's events were already being felt. Miller and Fletcher had been placed on administrative leave pending investigation, but few doubted the outcome. Their actions, captured on video and witnessed by hundreds, left little room for interpretation or defense. The airline's CEO had issued a formal apology, streamed live from corporate headquarters. "Today, our company failed to live up to our core values of respect and dignity. The treatment experienced by Colonel Washington and the Taylor family was inexcusable and does not reflect who we are or what we stand for. Effective immediately, we are implementing a comprehensive review of our policies regarding military escorts and introducing mandatory training on both military protocols and unconscious bias for all customer-facing staff." The statement continued. "We have reached out personally to Colonel Washington and the Taylor family to express our deepest apologies. Additionally, we are establishing the Sergeant Andre Taylor Memorial Fund to support educational opportunities for minority youth interested in military service, with an initial contribution of $1 million. The public response to the apology was mixed. Some praised the swift action and concrete steps, others criticized it as too little, too late, a reaction to public pressure rather than a genuine commitment to change. Veterans groups called for ongoing accountability and transparent reporting on the promised changes. Tricia Hayes had become an unexpected central figure in the story. Her decision to record and live-stream the confrontation had transformed what might have been dismissed as a misunderstanding into an undeniable documentation of disrespect. Morning shows competed for her first interview, and social media celebrated her as an example of an upstander, rather than a bystander. "I just did what anyone should do when they see someone being treated unfairly," she told Good Morning America. Colonel Washington was standing there with such dignity despite how he was being treated. "The least I could do was make sure people saw what was happening." For his part, Washington had received calls from military leaders, civil rights organizations, and politicians from both parties. The chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff had personally called to commend his professionalism under difficult circumstances. Civil rights leaders praised his quiet dignity in the face of discrimination, while noting that his uniform had not shielded him from prejudice, a reality familiar to many black service members. In the aftermath, the Pentagon announced a comprehensive review of protocols for military escorts on commercial flights, working with major airlines to ensure standardized procedures and training. The Secretary of Defense issued a statement emphasizing that, the dignified treatment of our fallen heroes is non-negotiable, regardless of race, background, or any other factor. As Washington helped the Taylors into the waiting car that would take them to the funeral home, he reflected on the unexpected journey of the past 24 hours. What should have been a solemn but straightforward duty had become something much larger, a moment that forced America to confront uncomfortable truths about how it sometimes treated those who served, particularly those of color. The hearse carrying Sergeant Taylor pulled away from the airport, led by a police escort with lights flashing. Traffic stopped along the route, drivers pulling over in spontaneous tribute. Some got out of their cars and stood with hands over hearts as the procession passed, a show of respect that transcended the divisions that had been so starkly revealed earlier in the day. In the car following the hearse, Darnell Taylor reached across the seat to grasp Washington's hand. "Colonel, I want you to know something. Andre wrote to us about you, about how you saw something in him that others didn't. He said you told him once that wearing the uniform didn't exempt you from fighting for respect, it just gave you a platform to do it with dignity." Washington nodded, his throat tight with emotion. "Your son understood that better than most. Today," Darnell continued, "you fought for his dignity. You showed the world what respect looks like, even when it isn't given to you. That means everything to us." As night fell over Atlanta, the events of the day rippled outward. Through newsrooms and living rooms, through barracks and boardrooms, through a nation still struggling to reconcile its highest ideals with its daily realities. For some, it was a wake-up call, for others, a painful confirmation of experiences long endured, for many, a reminder that the struggle for dignity and respect remained unfinished business in America. For Colonel Jamal Washington, it was simply about fulfilling a promise, to bring a fallen soldier home with the honor he deserved, regardless of the obstacles placed in his path. In doing so, he had inadvertently illuminated a truth that many preferred to ignore, that even in death, the journey toward equal treatment remained incomplete. 1 week after the incident that had captured national attention, Colonel Jamal Washington stood at attention beside Sergeant Andre Taylor's grave in a sun-dappled section of Atlanta's National Cemetery. The formal funeral with full military honors had concluded hours earlier, the rifle salute, the playing of taps, the meticulous folding of the flag that had draped Taylor's casket, and its presentation to Patricia Taylor with the solemn words, "On behalf of a grateful nation." Now, as most mourners had departed, Washington remained with the Taylor family for a more private moment of farewell. Darnell and Patricia stood hand in hand before their son's headstone, which bore not just his name and dates of service but the Bronze Star and Purple Heart he had earned in his final act of courage. "He saved 3 of his men," Washington said quietly. "That's who Andre was, always putting others first." Patricia nodded, tears streaming silently down her face. "That's how we raised him. To stand up for what's right, even when it's hard." The past week had been a whirlwind of activity and attention. The story of what had occurred at Philadelphia International Airport had sparked a national conversation about respect, discrimination, and how America treated its military personnel, particularly those of color. That morning, the airline had released its official statement regarding Miller and Fletcher. "Following a thorough investigation, we have terminated the employment of the 2 staff members involved in the incident at Philadelphia International Airport. Their actions violated both company policy and our core values of respect and dignity." The statement continued, "Additionally, we are implementing mandatory training for all staff on military escort protocols and unconscious bias. We are working closely with military officials to establish clear, standardized procedures for the treatment of service members, particularly those escorting fallen heroes." The public response to the firings had been largely supportive, though some commentators questioned whether 2 employees should bear the full weight of what they characterized as more systemic issues. Civil rights leaders had called for broader examination of how implicit bias affected everyday interactions, even in settings where respect should be guaranteed. Washington had maintained a dignified silence throughout much of the media frenzy, focusing instead on his duty to the Taylor family. He had escorted them through each step of the process, from the arrival in Atlanta, to the funeral home, to today's final farewell. He had done exactly what he had promised, ensured that Sergeant Taylor completed his journey home with the honor and dignity he deserved. As they prepared to leave the cemetery, Darnell Taylor turned to Washington. "Colonel, we received a call yesterday from the White House. The President would like to meet with us, and with you, to discuss what happened and how to prevent it from happening again." Washington nodded. "If you're comfortable with that meeting, I'll be there." "We are," Patricia said firmly. "Andre would want something good to come from this." Indeed, something already had. The incident had prompted not just the airline but the entire industry to review and strengthen protocols for military escorts. The Sergeant Andre Taylor Military Respect Policy was being adopted by major carriers, establishing clear guidelines for the treatment of service members escorting fallen comrades. Washington's own career had taken an unexpected turn. Upon returning to Fort Bragg, he had been informed of his selection for promotion to Brigadier General, a promotion that had been in process before the incident but now carried additional significance. Additionally, he was being considered for a new role overseeing military-civilian relations, with a focus on strengthening understanding between the armed forces and the society they served. Tricia Hayes, whose viral video had forced accountability, had formed an unexpected alliance with Washington. Together, they had appeared on several news programs, discussing not just what had happened but the broader issues it highlighted. Hayes had used her newfound platform to launch an initiative called Stand Up, Speak Out, encouraging Americans to actively intervene when witnessing discrimination. "It's not enough to not be racist," Hayes had said in a widely shared interview. "We have to be actively anti-racist. That means speaking up when we see something wrong, even when it's uncomfortable." The congressional hearings prompted by the incident had expanded beyond the specific case to examine the broader treatment of military personnel on commercial transportation and the persistent reality of racial bias in public spaces. Veterans groups, civil rights organizations, and industry representatives had all testified, creating a rare moment of bipartisan concern. As Washington helped the Taylors to their car, his phone buzzed with a message from his wife Keisha: "They're unveiling the memorial at 3. The kids and I will meet you there." The memorial in question was a new installation at Sergeant Taylor's alma mater, a small bronze plaque commemorating his service and sacrifice. Washington had been asked to speak at the unveiling, an honor he had accepted with humility. Later that afternoon, standing before a gathered crowd of students, faculty, and community members, Washington found himself reflecting on the journey of the past week. A journey that had begun with a simple assignment and evolved into something much more profound. Sergeant Andre Taylor exemplified the highest values of service, Washington began, his voice carrying across the hushed crowd. He understood that wearing the uniform means carrying the responsibility to stand for something greater than yourself. He knew that true strength isn't measured by force but by character, by doing what's right, especially when it's difficult. Washington paused, looking out at the diverse faces before him, young people who would shape the future of the country Taylor had died protecting. What happened last week revealed uncomfortable truths about our nation, truths that many would prefer to ignore. But Sergeant Taylor didn't serve a perfect America, he served an America striving to live up to its highest ideals. He served knowing that the journey toward those ideals remains unfinished, but believing it was a journey worth his dedication and, ultimately, his sacrifice. The crowd listened in respectful silence as Washington continued. "The greatest honor we can pay to Sergeant Taylor isn't just in ceremonies or memorials. It's in recommitting ourselves to the work of building a nation where everyone is treated with dignity and respect, not as an aspiration but as a reality. Where a uniform is respected not for the authority it represents but for the service it signifies. Where we judge each other not by appearance but by character and contribution." As Washington concluded his remarks, the memorial was unveiled, a simple bronze plaque bearing Taylor's likeness and the words, "Sergeant Andre Taylor. Soldier. Leader. Hero." He showed us the meaning of service. The crowd applauded, but Washington's focus was on the Taylor family, who stood with quiet dignity beside their son's memorial. In their faces, he saw grief still raw but also pride in a son who had lived his values until the very end. Later, as the crowd dispersed, Washington found himself alone with his family. Keisha squeezed his hand, while their children, Miles and Zoe, looked up at him with new understanding in their eyes. They had watched the events unfold on television, had seen their father stand firm with quiet dignity against disrespect. "Dad," Miles said hesitantly, "at school, they're saying you're a hero too." Washington shook his head. "I'm not the hero, son. I just did what was right. The real heroes are people like Sergeant Taylor, who give everything for what they believe in." Zoe, at 14 already showing the perception that would define her future, looked thoughtfully at the memorial. "But sometimes doing what's right is heroic too, especially when it would be easier not to." Her words captured something essential about the resolution that had been reached. Not just in the firings or the policy changes or the public apologies, but in the countless private commitments made by those who had witnessed what happened. Commitments to speak up rather than stay silent, to stand firm rather than step aside, to demand that America's promise of dignity and respect be extended to all who served, regardless of race. As the sun began to set over the campus, casting long shadows across the new memorial, Washington reflected on the journey that had brought him here, not just the events of the past week, but the longer journey of 23 years in uniform, of navigating spaces where his presence was sometimes questioned despite his rank, of teaching his children to stand tall in a world that didn't always see their worth. In the end, what had begun as a confrontation at an airport gate had become something larger. A moment of national reckoning, a reminder that the journey toward justice remained unfinished, and a call to continue that journey with the same quiet dignity that had characterized Washington's stand for Sergeant Taylor. ## The lessons we learn. This story reminds us that dignity isn't a privilege to be granted based on appearance, but a right everyone deserves, especially those who have sacrificed for their country. Colonel Washington's quiet strength in the face of discrimination represents a powerful truth. Sometimes the most effective resistance isn't loud confrontation but unwavering dignity and refusal to be diminished. The incident also highlights how discrimination persists even in spaces where respect should be guaranteed. A uniform, medals, and decades of service didn't shield Washington from prejudice, a reality many face daily regardless of their accomplishments. Perhaps most importantly, this story shows the power of bearing witness. Tricia Hayes didn't just observe injustice, she documented it, forcing accountability that might otherwise have been avoided. When bystanders become upstanders, systems are compelled to change. The airline's response, from initial defensiveness to meaningful policy changes, demonstrates how institutions can either perpetuate or disrupt patterns of discrimination. Real change requires not just removing individuals who discriminate, but examining and transforming the systems that enable such behavior. In honoring Sergeant Taylor, we're reminded that the ideals worth dying for are also worth living for, and standing up for, every day. What moment in this story resonated most with you? Have you ever witnessed discrimination and wished you had spoken up? Share your experiences in the comments below. If Colonel Washington's dignity in the face of disrespect moved you, please hit that like button and subscribe to hear more stories of courage against injustice. Don't forget to share this video with someone who needs to be reminded that one person standing firm can create ripples of change. Thank you for being part of our community that believes in honoring all heroes equally. Remember, when we stand together, justice becomes possible.